Week 11 of Big Brother 26 has come and gone, and with the house having to deal with the fallout of the double eviction and the endgame now truly starting, you know that both the gameplay and the strategy were going to start revving up. But how did it all break down? Well, that's why I'm here. In this video, I'm going to be recapping the events of Week 11 of Big Brother 26 and giving my updated power rankings. So with all of that preamble out of the way, it is the one and only RJ21 here, and let's get into the Big Brother 26 Week 11 recap and power rankings. Week 11 starts off with the Killer Keycard HOH competition, which is essentially a variation of the recurring microstacks competition we've been seeing since Big Brother 22. Essentially, what the HouseGuests have to do is stack these microscopic puzzle pieces with these comedically large tweezers to solve a puzzle. The first HouseGuest to stack all of their puzzle pieces and solve the puzzle correctly will become the new head of household. And in all honesty, this competition wasn't even close. I mean, nobody except for the eventual winner of the competition was able to garner any sort of momentum. And because of that, Makensy ends up winning this head of household, winning her second HOH of the season, essentially not even leaving the HOH room at this point. After the HOH competition, we see a conversation between Chelsie and Makensy where they are celebrating Makensy's HOH win, and they're basically reconfirming to one another that they are going to take each other to the final two. But they're also airing some grievances they're having about Cam and Cam's really poor competition abilities, like the fact that he hasn't won anything except for that one random Yankee swap veto all the way back in week 6, which is honestly ludicrous thinking that we've gotten this far and Cam has still yet to win anything, but I digress. Chelsie and Makensy are upset, but they do want to stick loyal to this 3 nonetheless. We then see a conversation between Rubina and Makensy where Rubina knows that both herself and Kimo would be the easy targets for Makensy, but obviously Rubina doesn't want that. So Rubina throws Chelsie under the bus and recalls a conversation between Chelsie and Rubina where they were talking about how if there were a double eviction scenario, that would be the opportune time to take Makensy out. And while this was a true conversation that did in fact happen, Makensy does not believe Rubina at all. So Makensy has a conversation with Chelsie where she relays this information, talking about how Rubina just threw Chelsie under the bus, and Chelsie lies through her teeth in this conversation, basically adamantly denying that this conversation ever happened or that Chelsie ever threw Makensy's name out, even though it absolutely did happen. But nonetheless, Makensy buys Chelsea's story, and this just further digs a bigger grave for Rubina. We then see a conversation between Kimo and Cam, where Kimo is essentially expressing to Cam that they need each other in this game at this point, with it becoming more and more obvious that there genuinely could be a potential all-women's Final 3 alliance forming. Kimo is expressing that the guys need to stick together in order to have any sort of fighting chance, but Cam and Kimo have never really had that good of a game relationship, so Cam isn't really buying what Kimo is taking, at least like on the surface level. So Cam goes to the HOH room and has a conversation between himself, Makensy, and Chelsie, where Cam just essentially snitches on Kimo and says what Kimo's been trying to do, and this just makes Kimo an even more obvious target. So at the nomination ceremony, Makensy chooses to nominate Kimo and Rubina, with Kimo as the target. After the nomination ceremony, we see a conversation between Kimo and Rubina where they're both consoling one another, and they both express the same sentiment that this is the worst case scenario for both of them, and in order for them to both have a chance of surviving this week, one of them needs to win this power of veto, and it is absolutely critical at this point. We then see a conversation between Chelsie and Makensy where they're basically trying to figure out who should be the main target. Even though Makensy wants to be targeting Kimo, she still wants to have some input for Chelsie, which is why they're having this conversation in the first place. Now, this conversation is especially important because Chelsie is starting to perceive Rubina as a bigger and bigger threat, because Rubina has been actively gaming against Chelsie. So Rubina is definitely somebody who could potentially get in Makensy's ear, and if certain scenarios end up happening, this could be really bad for Chelsie. So Chelsie is trying to plant the seeds to potentially take Rubina out, but Makensy is honestly not doing anything with these seeds, as she is adamant in wanting to take Kimo out. We then get to the veto competition, which is BB Comics, and if you watch this channel, you know that I love BB Comics. I mean, I made a video where I ranked seasons based on their BB Comics, which you can watch by tapping on the iCard in the corner, but that's besides the point. The BB Comics this season were honestly really good. Some of these modern seasons have been getting kind of lazy in how they make up their superhero names, either just being really lame puns or just absolutely like unrelated or like complete BS. But this season, nearly all of them were like absolutely killer. I understood all of the references and I just loved all of them. Personally, just off of like initial impressions, some of my favorites from this season were Tucker's, T-Core's, Kimo's, and Angela's. Like, they were just so good. But in all honesty, I really liked a majority of the comics this season. Like, this definitely should be in the top half of my favorite seasons in regards to the BB comics. But for those of you who don't know what the BB Comics competition is, essentially the HouseGuests have to use a zip line to peer into a window to see a wall of comics, and then they have to recreate that wall. But it isn't as easy as that, because the comics also have a decoy version that is meant to trip up the HouseGuests. Whoever is able to replicate the correct order and has the correct versions of all of the comics in the fastest amount of time will win the golden power of veto. Ultimately, the competition comes down to the top 3 of Chelsie, Makensy, and Kimo, which is definitely going to be important for later on in the week. But nonetheless, out of those 3, Makensy ends up coming out on top and wins the power of veto, winning her 3rd golden power of veto and her 4th veto overall. After the veto competition, Makensy and Chelsie are absolutely furious at Cam, because Cam has not been pulling his weight in these competitions whatsoever. When you look at Cam, you expect him to be this sort of physical specimen, and he was a former D1 collegiate athlete, so you would expect Cam to be good in competitions, especially BB Comics, considering how physical of a competition he is. But he didn't even make it top 3. And the 3rd place finisher finished in 30 minutes. So that means it took Cam longer than 30 minutes to finish this competition. And it creates so much drama that it leads both Chelsie and Makensy to theorize that Cam is throwing these endgame competitions to make himself appear like a lower threat, so he's dragged to the end, and the bigger threats in Makensy and Chelsie will be taken out before him. And that makes the both of them pretty paranoid, to the point where Makensy is potentially considering putting Cam up as the replacement nominee by using the power of veto on Rubina. We then see all of the HouseGuests in the living room talking about the competition, and this is Cam's opportunity to clear his name, even though he doesn't know that he needs to clear his name, but this is the opportunity for him to do so. And he makes it even worse by talking about how he was taking breaks in the competition. Like, he was taking breaks during the competition when it's a timed competition. Like, what are you doing? Like, oh my God, Cam. Like, this was so unintentionally funny, because on Cam's end, he's taking this as a joke, as like, oh man, I suck at these competitions. But on the other side with Chelsie and Makensy, they're taking this as genuine strategy, and this is genuinely putting Cam in a lot of danger. We then see a conversation between Chelsie and Cam, where Chelsie warns Cam that Makensy is considering using the power of veto on Rubina and nominating Cam as the replacement nominee because of all of the paranoia and suspicions around Cam potentially throwing these competitions. And Cam obviously is going to deny these claims, because that wasn't even his intention in the first place. He's not throwing these comps, he just sucks at them. And the fact that Cam is genuinely being considered as a renom is a complete blindside to Cam, so Cam needs to do absolute damage control to mitigate this threat whatsoever. So he has a conversation with Makensy where Cam expresses that he did not throw the competition and he just sucks. And even though there isn't any quote-unquote ideal competition for him to win, he knows that when push comes to shove, and if he truly does need to try and win a competition, he's going to put in his best effort, and that he's just expressing that he did not throw this competition. But Makensy still does not believe Cam, and it honestly might just be digging a bigger and bigger grave for him at this point, and it's really sinking his chances of potentially staying. However, none of this really matters, as at the veto ceremony, Makensy chooses not to use the power of veto and leaves her nominations intact, leaving Kimo and Rubina as the final nominees, which is the first time this entire season that the power of veto has never been used. I mean, the fact we made it all the way to the final 5 without the power of veto ever not being used is absolutely insane to me, and that's honestly what kind of makes the season so great, but I digress. After the veto ceremony, we see a conversation between Rubina, Makensy, and Chelsie, where they're expressing their sentiment of wanting a woman to win this season and wanting to potentially form this all-women's final 3. And Rubina is fully on board with this, and she's obviously on board with this because this means that it's probably going to keep her in this house. And unfortunately, that means sending Kimo home, but obviously Rubina wants to stay. So Rubina is hardcore pushing this all-women's final 3, and Makensy is agreeing with this, but she still does want to stay loyal to herself, Chelsie, and Cam. But Chelsie does not want to stay loyal to this women's final 3 at all, because she wants a woman to win She just wants it to be her to be the woman that ends up winning. And she's now starting to perceive Rubina as this bigger and bigger threat. So Chelsie has a conversation with Cam where Chelsie is basically snitching on Rubina and saying that Rubina is trying to throw around this idea of forming an all-women's Final Three. And honestly, Chelsie didn't even need to rat out this information because apparently Cam was already suspecting this himself. And Cam has been considering to flip the vote to keep Kimo and vote Rubina out, which is honestly music to Chelsea's ears. We then see Kimo doing his campaigning to try and stay in this house, where he first has a conversation with Cam, and he's once again expressing the sentiment that the guys need to stick together because that all-women's Final Three could genuinely form together. And with this new information from Chelsie that there could potentially be an all-women's Final Three forming, this does incentivize Cam to vote to keep Kimo. We also see Kimo having a conversation with Chelsie where Kimo is expressing that he could be used as a weapon to take out Makensy at the Final Four, and that keeping Kimo around would honestly be better for Chelsea's game, and that would be pretty good for Chelsie considering that Chelsie has started targeting Rubina. So Chelsie is considering flipping the vote to get Rubina out and to keep Kimo in the game. Before the vote, Cam and Chelsie have one more conversation where they are talking about whether or not to flip the vote, and they do land on the decision of maybe they do need to flip the vote and get Rubina out and keep Kimo in the game, because keeping Rubina would just create the opportunity for Makensy to potentially flip on the trio of Cam, Chelsie, and Makensy and keep Rubina around, and that is the last thing they want. But Chelsie does not want to leave Makensy out of this decision. So Chelsie, Cam, and Makensy have a conversation about who the target should be, and Makensy is very adamant on the target being Kimo. But both Cam and Chelsie talk about how maybe they should target Rubina, but Makensy is pushing back on this hard. Cam eventually leaves the room, and that leaves Chelsie and Makensy in the room where they're talking about their true intentions, and Makensy is once again expressing that she wants Kimo out, and how Cam is being somewhat selfish now that he's trying to push this agenda of getting Rubina out. And now it really just does end up lying on Chelsie as to who does Chelsie want out of this game. Ultimately, come the live vote and eviction, by a vote of 2-0, Kimo is the 12th house guest to be evicted from the Big Brother 26 house and the 5th member of the jury.
Cam has played under the radar the entire game, but will his season-long case of the yips be his undoing?
Now it's time to get into the power rankings. At number 5, the most recently evicted house guest, we have Kimo. And it is really sad to see Kimo go. I mean, it's very obvious how big of a fan he was of this game, and it definitely is sad to see a super fan go home. But honestly, Kimo's had a very impressive run considering like his entire time throughout the season. I mean, Kimo was put up on the block week 1 as a pawn, but then he wins the first ever AI arena. He then flips the vote with his closest ally in T-Core to completely change the entire house structure and the power dynamics by taking out Cedric. And even though Kimo was a bit more passive afterwards, and Kimo does end up becoming the perpetual pawn of the season, I mean, he was literally nominated every single week from week 7 onwards until his eventual eviction. So it is definitely like, you can definitely see the gradual like deterioration of Kimo's game as the season goes on. But that's not to say that Kimo wasn't an entertaining house guest. He was very intriguing in terms of like his gameplay and the way he kind of like managed everything in the house. It was honestly just really interesting and really entertaining to watch. And Kimo was definitely one of those people in the house that I certainly resonated a lot with. I mean, he was just one of those presences that you could just naturally feel his energy, and you could tell how badly he wanted to be there, and I just loved and appreciated that energy from Kimo so much. Plus the fact that he's like the first ever Hawaiian to be representing Hawaii. I mean, that's got to be something completely insane for Kimo, and I'm so glad that he's able to represent himself, his heritage, his state, everything that he stands for. I'm so glad that he was able to represent that. But in terms of the game he played this season, definitely tumultuous. He had his really high highs. He had his really low lows, especially throughout this entire like endgame phase where he basically just gets nominated every single week and somehow has a huge amount of win equity by the end of it because of how many times he's been nominated. It's honestly crazy how Kimo went from such an expendable player to a huge threat all of a sudden, considering like how those dynamics can flip. It's certainly interesting to see, But all in all, I loved Kimo this season. I thought he was a great house guest. I thought he was a great presence. I think he played a pretty interesting game, all things considered, but he has been evicted, and he eventually ends up here at number 5.
Angela, you're just throwing my name out there casually as you exit the house. With love, just be gone from my presence, please.
Now it's time to talk about the players that are actually still in the game. At number 4, the house guest I believe to be in the worst position in the house as of right now is Makensy. And in all honesty, Makensy has had some pretty bad HOH reigns this season. I mean, she's had 2 HOH reigns, and in both of them, she ends up making what I believe to be the incorrect decision. In her first HOH, she ends up using the power veto to take out one of her closest allies in Leah, and this time, she chooses not to use the power veto in a position where she should have probably used the power veto to guarantee that, number 1, her biggest threat in Kimo goes home, and number 2, she builds some loyalty and she builds some trust with the women's side, particularly Rubina. So Makensy could have done that, but now Makensy is in a really bad position to where she is actively being targeted into this Final 4. And even before that, if Makensy didn't win this Final 5 HOH, she was going to be the primary target. Mind you, she does end up winning the veto, so who knows who would have been the target afterwards. But still, Makensy was actively being targeted at the Final 5, and now numerous people are being set up to take the shot at Makensy to get her out at Final 4. What makes this even worse is the fact that Makensy cannot compete for HOH. So she literally has to win one competition, and it's the veto. She has to win this veto in order to stay in the game. Now, there definitely is a possibility that she could end up winning this veto, but like we saw with Tucker, slip-ups happen. And if Makensy ends up just fumbling this final competition, that's it for her. She's going home wholeheartedly. At this point, everybody recognizes Makensy as the biggest jury threat to win this game. Even though that's not necessarily true, people are perceiving Makensy as a huge threat to win because of the amount of competitions she's won. And at least within the prospects of the house, people are equating comp wins to jury equity. And while those two things aren't actually like equating one another, that's the perception within the house. And people are starting to perceive Makensy as this huge competition threat that needs to be taken out. And Makensy is just in this position where she needs to win this competition. I'm expressing how much she needs to win this veto because she genuinely is the biggest target as of right now. She's going to go home unless she wins this veto. And it's honestly all because of how poor of her position has been with both of these HOHs and how poorly she's been managing both her threat level and her relationships within the house. So because of all of that, I have to put Makensy here at number 4.
Cause what the Cam? I'm pissed. Do better. Do better.
At number 3, I have Rubina. And Rubina definitely had a tumultuous week this week. But it honestly is showing some pretty good prospects for Rubina, all things considered. I do want to commend Rubina for taking initiative to try to keep both herself and Kimo in the game by trying to make a move against Chelsie, because that is the one thing we haven't been seeing throughout this endgame is anybody trying to take an actual genuine shot at Chelsie. So I definitely do have to give Rubina her props in that sense. But it honestly backfires on her super hard to the point where Rubina almost goes home. Like, I'm pretty sure on Wednesday night, the vote was set to get Rubina out of the house. But obviously, the vote flips in the last minute, and they actually vote out Kimo instead of Rubina. So that's great for Rubina in that sense. But if the eviction episode happened on Wednesday instead of Thursday, Rubina goes home. Wholeheartedly, both Cam and Chelsie wanted to flip the vote and send Rubina out, and that is absolutely horrible. I think the main reason why Rubina is now starting to be perceived as this huge threat is because of her ties, or rather theoretical ties, to Makensy. People perceive that Rubina is close to Makensy and that Rubina is going to keep Makensy around over other people. And that is honestly worst case scenario for Rubina because Makensy is the biggest threat as of right now. So if they want to weaken Makensy, they can weaken her by getting out her quote unquote closest ally in Rubina. So that's really bad for her in that sense. But now that we're in the Final 4, Rubina needs to win a competition. Just like Makensy, Rubina needs to win a competition. Either in HOH or veto, it doesn't really matter. Rubina needs to win a competition because if Rubina is sitting next to certain people on the block come eviction night, Rubina is going to be in a lot of trouble. But I do have to say that there is a pretty high likelihood that Rubina is going to be able to slither her way into the final 3 because of how big of a threat Makensy is. And so because Rubina has almost accidentally used Makensy as this huge shield, it honestly is buying Rubina a little bit more time in this game. And if she can somehow win this final HOH and pulls the trigger on Chelsie and does to Chelsie what Steve did to Vanessa in Big Brother 17, that could win Rubina the game. But it's just a matter of, can Rubina actually get there? It's possible, but is it absolutely like set in stone? Not really, which is why I have her here at number 3.
Going into this HOH, as a tiny human, this tiny HOH is the perfect comp for me. I can't win anything. It just starts beating down on you, you know? Like,
At number 2, I have Cam. And Cam did not have a very good week this week. I mean, Cam is literally almost the replacement nominee because of how bad he is at competitions. I can't recall from memory that somebody became a threat because of how bad they were at competitions. Like, that sentiment alone just sounds crazy to me. Like, hearing the words come out of my mouth that somebody was targeted because of how bad they are in competitions, like, I genuinely, I don't know. I've never, at least like in recent Big Brother history that I can remember, I can't remember somebody getting targeted because of their poor competition performance. And the fact that Cam is a trailblazer in that sense, honestly, iconic for him. But all things considered, after Cam is able to survive being a replacement nominee and not getting put up on the block, Cam did some really good work, and he really solidified his bonds with Chelsie. Now, it is a bit worrying that Cam is really putting all of his eggs in one basket with Chelsie and kind of banking on the fact that Makensy is going to be taken out at Final 4, and the fact that he is kind of depending on that in order for his endgame scenarios to be really like looking well for him. That does definitely worry me, but I do think Cam is in a pretty safe position. There are a couple scenarios in which I am worried if he is sitting on the block. If he's sitting next to Makensy on the block and Rubina is the sole vote, Cam goes home. If Cam is sitting on the block next to Chelsie and Makensy is the sole vote, Cam goes home. There's a lot of scenarios in which Cam could go home if the competitions don't end up going right for him. So I am really worried for him, in all honesty. Like, the threat of this all-women's alliance actually coming together and forming is a genuine reality. Like, the fact that we are at the Final 4 with 3 women, this literally has not happened since Big Brother 13. Like, do you understand how crazy that is? 13 seasons, and we have not had 3 women in the Final 4. So you have to assume that the other women are looking at each other like, y'all, we can make history by staying together. And that is at Cam's demise. So honestly, like I've been saying with Makensy and Rubina, Cam probably needs to win a competition too. Honestly, everybody needs to win a competition. But for Cam, I don't think he is in as much immediate danger, which is why I have him here at number 2.
How do you feel about Kimo's eating habits?
Oh my gosh! And then he also has the nerve to lick his fingers. It's not that good.
At number 1, the house guest I believe to be in the best position as of week 11 is still Chelsie. Like, Chelsie is the only house guest I believe did not have a bad week this week. Chelsie is the only house guest who was not in any real threat of danger or going home. Chelsie has an absolute stranglehold of this game, but I think one bit of an error or a flaw that Chelsie has made in this game is that she is now starting to be perceived as this huge jury threat. The likes of Kimo and Rubina are both recognizing that Chelsie is a huge endgame threat, and she could genuinely go in front of that jury and absolutely sweep everybody. So the fact that Chelsie is not able to manage her threat level in that sense is definitely worried. And the deeper and deeper we're getting into this game, and the more and more dominance that Chelsie is showing over the entire strategic landscape of the game, it does make me worried that Chelsie is gonna get Vanessa'd. Like, the fact that the real threat of like Chelsie losing this final HOH and then just getting cut in 3rd place despite playing probably the best game of the season thus far, it's really scary. It's really scary, and I hope that it doesn't happen because Chelsie has played such an amazing game throughout this entire season. She's been so consistently strong. She's always been in a position of power in influencing and leading certain decisions. So Chelsie has honestly been doing such a good job this season. I would hate to see her get cut at the very, very end like a fallen angel. I would hate to see that for Chelsie. But in all honesty, with how much good work Chelsie has been putting in, it would make sense. I mean, Chelsie has ties with basically everybody in the house. She has a final 2 with Makensy. She has a final 2 with Cam. She has an all-women's alliance with Rubina. And even though Rubina is starting to perceive Chelsie as a threat, I think there are more apparent targets in front of Chelsie, such as Makensy, that are being targeted and that would be taken out over Chelsie. Now, the only scenario in which I can foresee Chelsie going home this week is if Cam wins HOH and Rubina wins the veto, leaving Makensy and Chelsie as the final nominees with Rubina being the sole vote. That is the only scenario in which I can genuinely foresee Chelsie going home. But the fact that there's only one scenario in a bunch of different scenarios here at the final 4 is very impressive. And it's because of that that I have to put Chelsie here at number 1.
Did I say that?
I don't want to go. I know.
Overall, this week was kind of predictable. I mean, Makensy won HOH. She targeted Kimo. Kimo ended up going home. I mean, pretty standard things there. But in all honesty, the final 5 round has never been the most intense and most captivating round of gameplay, all things considered. So I guess there's not really too much to expect there. But in all honesty, this game has slowly devolved in terms of its strategy. It used to be, what crazy or insane thing is going to happen this week, to how is Chelsie going to set herself up for the win this time? And honestly, the more and more that the season is proceeding, the more and more it's becoming apparent that this is literally Chelsea's game to lose. I would really hate to see Chelsie fumble the bag in these last stages of the games, unless it is in true entertainment downfall, kind of like how Cody cut Nicole at the final 3 in Big Brother 22. I would love that sort of entertainment level, even though Nicole wasn't the front runner to win Big Brother 22. But I digress. If we get that type of entertainment and seeing Chelsie get cut, then I would kind of appreciate it. But still, this is Chelsea's game to lose, and she's honestly the most deserving winner up until this point. So it would be kind of disappointing to see her lose, but with Big Brother 26, who knows how things are going to happen. But those are just my thoughts. Leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends if you have any of those, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.
She's the greatest. She's a wonder. Don't forget to love one another. The best part of BB. We love you, Julie.